So PCOS, as I think most of you must be practicing and most of you must be aware, it's a condition which is slowly increasing over the time. So I remember when I passed out in 1985 and started seeing gynec and obstetric cases, way back in 1990, 92, 93, there were hardly any cases of PCOS. And I had to literally dug the literature to find out the remedies for PCOS or to find out what exactly is PCOS. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And when I went back to the textbooks of gynecology and obstetrics, there was just a mention of a Sten-Leventhal syndrome, which was described in 1935. And this was the sort of a pioneer work that was done in something called as PCOS at that time. And it had the symptom complex of what we see today. The same symptoms were mentioned, like a raised luteinizing hormone, the presentation of oligomenorrhea, that is the infrequent menstruation, or the cycles between the two menstrual cycle is more than 35 days. That's oligomenorrhea. A patient with oligomenorrhea also comes with infrequent ovulation because the cycles are infrequent, 4 to 8 cycles in a year instead of a normal 10 to 14 cycles a year. So they have less chances of ovulation. It also presents with high levels of androgens, and that's why we have hirsute features, hair on unwanted parts. Because of not ovulating regularly, they also have infertility, oligovulation, and one more important complication during pregnancy in case they conceive is recurrent miscarriages. So this was all described way back in 1935, but when I started seeing my gynec patients, it was a rarity at that time. But it was so surprisingly from 1995 onwards, I remember the cases started increasing. Like now, if you see, almost 1 in a 10 female has this condition. So, what has gone wrong? Why sudden influx of so many patients, which was not there earlier? The causative factor is still a query. We still don't know the exact cause of it. There are many postulations, there are many theories. I will come to that theory a little later on. So PCOS is a lifetime female hormone imbalance. It's not a one time thing that you give a remedy and the patient is cured. No, it never happens. It can be managed like diabetes mellitus. It's again a multifunctional, multifactorial disease. And what is happening in a case of PCOS is there the maturing eggs they fail to expel from the ovary. There are multiple tiny follicles at the age of the ovary, and they are instead of one follicle or a two follicle which should mature with the time of ovulation and should rupture, this doesn't happen. So there are multiple tiny immature follicles, and that's why if you see a ultrasound, it gives a beaded appearance of the ovaries. So these ovaries are filled with multiple tiny follicles, and they are misleadingly called cysts. They are not the actual cysts. So if you look up the rubric and you want to prescribe an ovarian cyst, as the name says, it's polycystic ovarian disease. And if you look up the repertory and you look up the rubric ovarian cyst and you want to prescribe on that, that is an absolutely a wrong rubric to choose from. Well, because these are not the cysts. And the cyst that is mentioned in repertory or in materia medica are actually the other type of cyst. It could be a chocolate cyst, which is of endometriosis, or it could be a follicular cyst, or it could be a corpus luteal cyst. These are a different pathology itself. So don't take ovarian cyst as one of the rubric for considering in a polycystic ovarian disease. So let's go to the epidemiology. You find that 60% of all patients who are not ovulating regularly. Nowadays, all this is very clear. Earlier, 20 years back, people were not tracking ovulation, but nowadays we have kits available where you can a couple who is planning to conceive can track when is the time when there's a LH surge, and that can be picked up by the LH kit. So 60% of all female who are not ovulating turns out to be a case of PCOD. 92% of all idiopathic hirsutism patients, they come with excess hair on the face, excess hair on the body. They turned out to be cases of polycystic ovarian disease. Even 22% of the normal female volunteers, they don't have any symptoms, but they could be having polycystic ovarian disease. And most patients, as you are aware of it, to diagnose a patient having PCOS, you have to have at least minimum two criteria. Just a sonography is not enough. But hyperandrogenism, signs of excess testosterone, especially the free testosterone, that shows in the form of either alopecia, or it could be hirsutism, or it could be excess hair on the body, or along with that, a patient has to have irregular menstrual cycles. Along with that, if it is confirmed with a polycystic appearance on the ovaries, then only you have a confirmed diagnosis of polycystic ovarian disease. I was going through certain research material, especially in the London and the European countries, and they have found that South Asian women, especially when we talk of South Asian women, that is what we are talking about, the Indian women, have more severe cases of PCOS. They have more hirsutism, they have more insulin insensitivity, and they have more chances of acanthosis nigricans compared to the white counterpart. So that's what even I'm seeing here in the US itself. That compared to the amount of or the number of Indian females or Indian origin females coming with PCOS is more compared to the white girls. And they have a more severe presentation in PCOS. So how does a PCOS patient present? So most of you are aware of it, and I've been talking about it in the last few slides. So most of them will present with oligomenorrhea, infrequent menstrual cycles, and 50% of them will come with amenorrhea. So amenorrhea is absence of menses, and when we talk of amenorrhea, this is the secondary amenorrhea, not the primary amenorrhea. So a patient who has been menstruating regularly and for the last 6 months, if she doesn't get a period, then you label this patient having amenorrhea. So this is very, very difficult part to treat in gynecology and obstetrics. In what way? Because the menstrual cycle anyway comes once in a month. So a patient has to have that much patience to wait for menstrual irregularities to become normal, because anyway you have to wait for 1 month. It's not like a common cold or like a acidity symptoms or a headache. Menstrual complaints are cyclical and they come every month. So even if a patient has dysmenorrhea or a patient has menorrhagia, you have to anyway wait for that particular 1 month to see the results of it. And especially the hormonal issues, the hormonal conditions take a long time to resolve with any type of treatment. They also present with infertility. Almost 30% of the patient with PCOS, they have infertility. And usually they are associated with obesity. But I have seen even thin patients having PCOS. So it's not a must that you have to have obesity, but obesity makes the PCOS symptoms more severe. And why is it so? Because one of the complication of PCOS is patient go in for insulin resistance. The skin presentations, very evident unless the patient has really taken good care of herself. Hirsutism, it's a very difficult condition to treat. And once the hair follicle has already been developed, with any pathy, you cannot remove these hair follicles. There are many girls who come to me and this is really embarrassing to them. Their appearance is very, very important, especially in the teenage years. The acne, I have seen so many patients who are sort of obsessed with the acne. Every morning they get up, they have to look in the mirror. They use the mirror which can magnifies their face, and every day, as if they're counting the pimples, the texture of the skin. They can get obsessed with acne. And I have seen one patient, I remember, she was so obsessed that pregnancy, the babies, they were not important to her, but her acne was most important to her. Of course, this patient also conceived very well with this pure homeopathy, and her acne was much under control during pregnancy too. But her obsession with acne was really, really surprising. And at the same time, I want to tell you that patients with PCOS have a lot of psychological issues, which is not very highlighted. But nowadays, now the psychologist, the psychiatrist, and even the primary care physician here in the US, they are aware of the psychological trauma that this patient go through it. So skin manifestations, hirsutism, alopecia, especially the scalp hair, the thinning of the hair, acne, hormonal acne, or a severe outbreak of acne, very, very common with high levels of testosterone. And acanthosis nigricans, that's a black or a dark pigmentation in the neck region or in the folds. This all also suggests insulin resistance. So if I have to talk about PCOS, or if I'm a teacher and I have to make a therapeutics of polycystic ovarian disease, and if I just look up all the symptoms that we just discussed, so these are the repertorial totality. These are just a common symptom that I've just put them in the repertory and want to find out which are the remedies which are going to come up. As our common knowledge says, it has to be the constitutional remedies. There is no shortcut, there are no organ remedies because it's a multifactorial problem. So I'm just looking at the rubrics, all the general rubrics, the common symptoms I've just put it. Just to give an idea, just to get an idea of which remedies can come up, which remedies are going to be thrown to us. Mind well, PCOS is not very well presented in Materia Medica or not even in the repertory. It's because it's possibly a very, very new thing. As I just mentioned, in 1935, somebody in a gynecological book have mentioned one uh, idea that this could be a Sten-Leventhal syndrome, which was not so prevalent at that time, but now it is so prevalent. I'll come to the causes a little later on, but I want to just throw a certain group of remedies which could be important in dealing with PCOS. So just looking at the some of the common symptoms: hairy lip, upper abdomen, hairy face, hairy parts, unusual. Very few remedies are given in Materia Medica and repertory. Acne, menses too late, menses absent, amenorrhea, obesity, skin discoloration, and head falling out of hair, alopecia in women. So most of the drugs that you see coming in the front are all the constitutional, deep acting constitutional female remedies. It starts with pulsatilla, calcarea, sepia, graphitis, natrum mur, sulfur, lyco, phosphorus, thuja, kalika. So most of the remedies are in a mineral group. There are few nosodes also going to come up. I will show that little later. So just to keep in mind that most of the time we are going to deal with a constitutional remedy. Going back again to presentation of polycystic ovarian disease. Young girls coming with most evident hirsute features showing of hyperandrogenism, menstrual irregularities. You don't have to get an ultrasound done unless pelvic examination is not possible, or if patient comes with very high levels of testosterone, usually higher than 200 ng per dl, then you are suspecting an adrenal pathology, which can also present in the same way as of a polycystic ovarian disease. So to just to rule out any other pathology apart from polycystic ovarian disease, you may advise the sonography. And what is the sonography features? As you see, there are multiple small follicles that can be seen on the ovaries. So what are the use ultrasound criteria? I have seen so many people presenting cases of ultrasound and just say, oh, she had a multiple tiny cyst in the ovary. And after 2 or 3 months of homeopathic treatment, now look at the sonography, it doesn't show any polycystic ovarian disease. But that's not what you should be looking at. If you are a thorough clinician, if you are an ultrasound a person who understands ultrasound, or you are a gynecologist, there are certain criteria on which you decide whether the patient has PCOS or not. So what are the important things that you look for? The increased in the ovarian area or the volume, increased in the roundness index, ovarian length versus the ovarian width, decreased uterine width compared to the ovarian breadth, and the internal echoes. The morphological signs are you should have more than 10 follicles in a varying size between 2 to 10 millimeter size, and they are seen at the periphery. That's a typical beaded appearance of the polycystic ovarian disease. Peripheral repartition of microcyst and increased echogenicity of the ovarian stroma. So these are all the features should be there to diagnose a patient having PCOS. Now this is a typical ultrasound. You can see the cyst at the periphery. Multiple cysts are there, and this sonologist has marked them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Already 10 cysts are there. And there is a central stroma in the center, which is also a thickened appearance of the ovaries. So the thick ovaries, that could be a one sign of an polycystic ovarian disease. So what is happening at the hormonal level? The characteristic of this syndrome is the inappropriate release of gonadotropin secretion, and that causes the LH to rise, the luteinizing hormones to rise throughout the menstrual cycle. So now this is not a normal thing. When a GnRH or a gonadotropin releasing hormone is, it's usually a pulsatile release. It's not coming in a spurt. It's a every day you have a certain rhythm of GnRH, and that rhythm is different in every individual. So LH is supposed to rise just before the ovulation, and it remains high in the post-ovulatory phase. But what is happening here is, because of this irregular pulsation of the GnRH release, the LH is tonically elevated throughout the menstrual cycle. FSH, that is a follicular stimulating hormone, which is the hormone which helps in developing the follicle, could be normal or it could be low. And what is important is the ratio between LH to FSH, which has to be more than 3. So these are all the criteria which should be there for you to diagnose a patient with PCOS. And what is important is, not the any time of the menstrual cycle you can get these hormones done. The best time to get this hormonal test done and to diagnose PCOS is between the 2nd and the 5th day of the menstrual period. The pathogenesis, still there are lots of queries. Nobody exactly knows why it happens. Is it a genetic? Could be. They are working on certain genetic mutations that can predispose that female child to develop PCOS. Or there is one more theory which says that if a mother is exposed to BPA, that is that's the bisphenol that you find in a plastic containers. So is it the plastic? Is it the chemical in that plastic bottles that nowadays we are using so many? I mean, everybody you see we're having a plastic bottle and drinking water from that. So this plastic can interfere with the estrogen formation, and it could be anti-estrogenic. So is it the environment? Is it the chemicals? Is it the pollution? Is it the stress? All this could be the potential causes of polycystic ovarian disease. So it's a complex multi-genetic disorder. It causes disordered gonadotropin release, and that's why the GnRH release is disturbed. That's why the LH is disturbed. That's why the levels of testosterone are disturbed. And this causes hyperinsulinism, and the insulin resistance play a role. So it's a syndrome which is very similar to adult onset diabetes. It's a syndrome which is responsible for insulin resistance, or the other way around, the insulin resistance may be responsible for this particular syndrome. And the newer theory in 2019, the one more theory has come up, is the inflammation. Now every modern diseases, the autoimmune disease, all this could be result of the inflammation going on in the body. So these are the new theories now, that insulin resistance, whether that is the cause, or it's inflammation that is the cause, or it's the genetic. A child is born with this genetic problem and she's going to develop later in her life, whether it has come through mother, or even the older sisters also may be having PCOS, or the father has a metabolic syndrome, and that gene has to be passed on to the offspring. So there are many theories. And as I just been talking about it, the typical physical exam, when a patient complains of acne, you can see the acne. Patient says that she has hirsutism. When you examine her neck, there is acanthosis nigricans, and the laboratory evidence of hyperandrogenism, high levels of testosterone, high levels of DHEAS, that is dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, and the decreased sex hormone binding globulin, that is SHBG, and increasing luteinizing hormone. All this comes to the pointer of a diagnosis of PCOS. So what are the hormonal assays? These are the normal assays. If you know the normal, then you know what is abnormal. So if this hormonal assay is done in between the second and the fifth day of the menstrual cycle, these are the normal levels. The FSH, LH, this is always in a range, remember. So I have seen so many patients coming to me and saying, Doctor, my FSH and LH is normal. It's in the normal range. It's a normal range. She may be having FSH of 5 and having LH of 20. And she says, yeah, doctor, everything is in the range. But then you have to explain to the patient that it's not the levels remaining in the range that is important, but it's the ratio of LH to FSH that is very important. Testosterone, if it is between 20 and 80, is normal. But I have seen patients who are in a milder case of PCOD having testosterone little higher than 80, little hirsute features, not excessive. So I have seen that one more thing in my practice. I've seen that the testosterone levels are very important to know how your patient is going to respond. Over the years of 20 years of follow-ups, 30 years of follow-ups, I've seen the patient having very high levels of testosterone. Of course, I'm not talking about 200. If it is more than 200, then you have to look up other important causes which is giving rise to such high levels of testosterone. And then it could not be just ovarian, it could be the adrenal pathology. So these patients with little moderately high testosterone respond better to homeopathic treatment and the constitutional treatment than a patient with a very high, of course not up to 200, but more than 100, more than 150, they have a very high testosterone level. There are little difficult patients to manage. DHEAS 100 to 350, DHEA 100 to 350, SHBC, if it is decreased, it is suggestive of PCOS. And another important, the last thing is fasting glucose versus fasting insulin ratio. If it is more than 4.5, that is suggestive of patient going in for insulin resistance and PCOS. Now you know the long-term consequences. Okay, initially she may come with menstrual irregularities. Now she's married, she may come with infertility. If she's married and she has conceived, she may come with repeated abortions. But now she is in her 40s, she has PCOS that has been going on. I mean, you cannot completely cure it, you can manage it. Now she is in her 40s. What are the other things that she's going to get more predisposed to? She may have higher chances of diabetes mellitus. Or if she is pregnant, even gestational diabetes is very common in this patient. She may go in for hypertension later in life because of the obesity, because of the metabolic syndrome, and definitely endometrial carcinoma is one more thing that you have to keep in mind with a patient of PCOS because of hyperestrogenism for such a long time. She may not conceive, she may conceive, so that there's no break in the hormonal cycle. The estrogen is constantly being secreted. So that's a hyperestrogenic stage which predisposes her for CA endometrium. So how do you manage these patients? First and foremost is the weight reduction. If she comes back to the ideal BMI, that is the best way she can deal with her PCOS. Now, I still remember a case of, she must be around 24, 25, and she came to me in somewhere in 90s, 92, 93. She was a very difficult case. And as I'm telling you, this is absolutely a newer thing. There were no teachers before me who could give me a guidance how to deal with a PCOS patient. She was a young girl. I still remember her life situation. She was adopted by her aunt. She had just finished her studies, and her her parents, whatever the adopted parents, uh, father was about to retire. They had to move to a bigger house. She had just started earning and she wanted to support her parents. So she had a full responsibility of the household. And that at that moment she didn't want to get married because there was nobody else looking after her parents. So she came to me with this heavy bleeding, irregular bleeding. She was a case of PCOS, and I really struggled at that time to control her bleeding. I have tried all the acute remedies to control her bleeding. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it would not. She would have bleeding after 20 days, bleeding after 1.5 months. I'm sorry. So I gave constitutional remedy. I remember giving her Thuja. That time the folliculum was not even there in the picture. Anyway, so this is about 92, 93, and I thought I really struggled giving her relief. So for 2 years she took treatment. She would do on and off, and after that she just disappeared. And she met me again in 2000, 2002, 2003. She was already around late 30s, and she came to me with saying, "Doctor, now I just got married. All after her responsibilities are done, her parents were taken care of, and she also got married pretty late because she had a lot of responsibility. And at that time, she came with, of course, her husband also was in 40s, and she wanted to conceive, and husband had some uh, sperm problem. I think he had oligospermia, if I correctly remember. And I asked her, "Well, what happened to your menstrual cycle?" And I was pleasantly surprised. She said, "Doctor, you almost treated me and I'm perfectly fine." I said, "How come you are fine?" That was a question in my mind. Of course, I didn't ask her that. And she said, "Doctor, I've been maintaining my weight." She was the same as 10 years back I had seen her. "I'm doing regular exercises every day, come what may. Whether it is rain or it is whatever it is, I always go for a walk and maintain my weight since last 10 years, and my menstrual cycles are perfect." So that's an important thing that has really stuck to my mind, that this patient managed her PCOD by maintaining her weight. And of course, she said, "Dr. Thuja, whatever I used to give her really helped her," but she managed her PCOS for 10 years. So that's the important thing about managing the weight. Dietary modifications. Nowadays, I just recently visited India and saw so many dietitians having speciality in treating PCOS. So ketogenic diet, which is targeted to the patient, targeting looking at her life situation, lifestyle, as well as low carb diet. Both work very well in this patient. And it's very similar to the diabetic diet pattern. And recently I've heard about sort of a good results even with diabetes in intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, and low carb, that really may be a key to managing the PCOS. Exercise, as you know, it's a very good regular exercises like in a diabetes. This is also is a must in a PCOS patient. And certain home remedies like cinnamon. Mind well, even we have a remedy also from cinnamon. which is a drug. For last time I talked about it, it's a bright red bleeding. Anyway, so this is the home remedy. Cinnamon is supposed to be even good for diabetes. Chromium and Rufa, all these are supposed to be uh, the other agent that can help dealing with a PCOS patient. Now coming back to the stress, I remember Dr. Shankaran also mentioning 10-15 years back that is it the females who are now taking up the roles of males, and that's why the cortisol levels are rising, and that's why the testosterone levels are rising. So that could be one theory. Mind well, there are a lot of theories, and one of the things that I found on net is the role of stress. So what is the normal pathway for cortisol production in absence of chronic stress and training load is cholesterol, pregnenolone, progesterone, and then it is converted into cortisol. Now when cortisol is not enough, and it requires a lot of support. So where does the cortisol get support from? So it starts depleting the progesterone, and that's why the progesterone levels in PCOS patients are low because of the chronic stress that they are undergoing, or they are going through a lot of stress. The progesterone levels start decreasing because cortisol takes the use of it. So catecholamines regulate the pulsatile release of GnRH, and through their effect on the females, it either ceases menses or menses becomes disordered. Again, this is the slide also I shown last time. This is not our theory, it's not there in the homeopathic books, but it is a book. It's a Jeffcoat's textbook of gynecology, which mentions that environment can cause or encourage physical and mental ill health. The psyche influences the development of the organic disease. It affects the illness, begets anxiety, and this in turn begets the illness. So it's a vicious cycle. Anxiety causing hormonal changes brings about the symptoms, and because of the symptoms, it causes again the anxiety. So it's a vicious cycle, and you find that PCOD patients are always in that vicious cycle. Excess of acne, excess of hair growth, menses not coming on time, that causes anxiety, and anxiety causes again rise in the catecholamine levels. It affects the GnRH, it affects the LH secretion. So it's a vicious cycle. So you need to break this cycle. Emotions and environment are two very important factors in pelvic diseases. So we have a great tool of constitutional remedies. And which are the constitutional remedies going to work best for polycystic ovarian disease? And this is what I found in Roberts. Very beautifully written. And it is confirmed through the practice. The constitutional remedies of sufficient depth to influence the glandular conditions are a great polychrist. So for all hormonal conditions, for all endocrine conditions, the chemicals that are based in the elements of the physical body, like sulfur, like silicia, like phosphorus, mag group, kali group, and natrium group, and the carbons. These are the common remedies which are going to be useful. Again, coming to the same graph that I showed earlier, see most of the remedies, calcarea, graphitis, natrimure, sulfur, and surprisingly even lycopodium. And I've seen, though the pulsatilla comes front in the first drug that comes up is pulsatilla. In most of the glandular conditions, pulsatilla is absent, but you find that lycopodium is more indicated than pulsatilla. Pulsatilla is mainly used for functional disorders of female conditions, functional amenorrhea, functional delayed puberty, or she has suppression of menses from getting her feet wet. These are all functional conditions, or suppression of menses from fright, or suppression of menses from undeveloped breast and uterus. So these are all the functional problem is where you are going to use pulsatilla. So pulsatilla is rarely used, but of course, if it is a through and through case, you can always start with pulsatilla and go to the remedies which is related to pulsatilla. Maybe later on any antimiasmatic can help you with help in clearing this case. So, so the remedies are mainly going to be the mineral. Next, we find that lycopodium, as I just mentioned, that more than pulsatilla, lycopodium could be more useful in case of PCOS, or you have to use nosodes. I've seen very rarely patient just responds to a constitutional line of treatment. Unless you use a nosode or unless you use an antimasmatic or sometimes the use of sarcode, these are all going to be helpful in the cases of PCOS. So when I was asked to prepare for PCOS, this topic is very, very dear to me. And why? Because it's very challenging. There is no guidelines, there is no one to guide you, especially for me. I'm talking about because in 90s and 2000, early 2000, people have not seen these patients. And I had to treat these patients with coming with different variety of symptoms. So this was very dear to me. I did a lot of research and of course because it is so dear to me, for my MD thesis this was my MD topic of polycystic ovarian disease. And when I was asked to talk, there were so many cases that came to my mind, and I said, how do I select out of so many patients that I've seen? So I decided maybe it was I should just experience my or I should just share my experience with you. Maybe just start with a constitutional remedy, whether that's worked, or show some cases where, along with the constitutional, nosodes have worked, or show some cases where there is a sarcode which has really helped in these patients. So I have few patients, I have few histories. I've tried to put them in a nutshell and try to show how I have treated those patients. So this is again a idea about how which are the other remedies which are going to be helpful. So it could be intercurrent, it could be miasmatic, it could be a nosode, or it could be a sarcode. So tuberculinum is coming up 7 by 4. Medorinum is a very, very important drug. Remember, the expression of PCOD patient is a psychotic expression in most of the time. Obesity, hair on unwanted parts. If you look up Thuja, TUB, and cortisone, these are the few drugs which are coming up very clearly in the repertory and in Materia Medica. Recently studied drugs could be folliculinum and also carcinosin, which I have seen with very good results. Folliculum came pretty late. So after 2000, I started using folliculinum in certain patients. But carcinosin also is a wonderful remedy that can be really worked very well. If there's a time, I will discuss one case of carcinosin. So let's start with some of the very interesting cases. So this case came to me pretty early. It's one of the earliest cases of infertility that I saw in 1999. So a 26-year-old female came with irregular menstruation, and she was married since 2 years, irregular period since 2 years, and she came with inability to conceive, and she came with an ultrasound report. She also had some symptoms of acidity, burning, indigestion with urging for stools, aggravated by empty stomach, aggravated by spices. These are all the common things. Better by cold milk, but she's also better by tea. That's also a very peculiar symptom. It's also associated with dizziness and profuse perspiration. Whenever she would get this burning pain, she would go in a anxiety mode, she would go in a panic mode, and she said, "Oh, what's happening?" And I see so many patients, even in the US, whenever they sometimes mistaken this acidity symptoms or GERD symptom with as if they are going to get a heart attack, and they eventually end up in an emergency room, and finally they've been diagnosed with just acid reflux. So they can sometimes mimic the symptom as if they are going to get a heart attack because of the uh, pressure of the diaphragm pressing onto the heart and difficulty in breathing and sensation of choking. So all this could be a sign of acidity. She had a very strong liking for spices, salt, cold drinks, aerated drinks. Very chilly patient, and she had a very strong tubercular history. And of course, out of anxiety, she had a feeling of heat and feverishness. So these are just a few of the very characteristic symptoms. And I'm telling you this as a first case because it was a very clear-cut case. And I think by the end of the history, you will realize that the drug is very common. And and you don't have to look for any special drug for PCOD. Sometimes our just constitutional drug will definitely work wonders. She was a very social person, liked to be in company, very jovial. People would love to be in her company. Uh, Usually very relaxed, but when something happens, especially to herself, to her family, or when she has a bout of anxiety, bout of acidity, she would go in an anxiety state. This is the sonography which she came to me, and she responded pretty well. She had a tubercular history, and she came to me with 1.5 months of amenorrhea. She came with a PCOD report on the sonography. I started her on phosphorus 1M, just few doses, 4 doses, because a very strong tubercular diathesis. She was anxious. She had a craving for cold things, aerated drinks, chilly patient. This patient responded superb with phosphorus. I had thought of giving intercurrent of tuberculinum later in her treatment, but you'll realize with her follow-up that she got a period after getting phosphorus. She got a period on 7th Feb. Again, phosphorus was repeated post-menstrual. Again, she got a period in March, exactly at the same time. And in April, she came with urine pregnancy test positive. So this is our sonography with a pregnancy. You can see the gestational sac. So this patient was pretty early in my practice, and I got this. What give me a lot of confidence that yes, PCOD patient and infertility can be treated with homeopathy. This is another important case. Now this patient is still following up, and this patient is in the US. That patient was in India. Miss SS, let's just put her name as SS. She was 35-year-old when she came to me. This was, I think, 2018. This was the date is the American date, that is February 16, 2018. She came to me, and I still remember this was just 2 years back. She came with her mother. Both of them came for history together. Her chief complaint was irregular period was not so important at that time, but she had a lot of symptoms of GERD. She had severe migraines. That was her chief complaint. And by the way, she said, "Doctor, I have PCOD also, and if you can help me with that PCOD." So she came with the menstrual irregularity. She said that since last 5 years, menses come at the interval of 3 to 4 months, and it would last for 30 days. So this is a very typical thing that you see, as I just mentioned to you, my initial case of that young girl who would bleed for a number of days and had a very irregular periods, and I had given a tuja as an intercurrent. So this patient will have a lot of fluctuation in the hormones, and that's why the endometrium develops for 3 to 4 months. There is a thickening of the endometrium because of the constant influence of estrogen, and there's no break because there's no ovulation, there's no break in the progesterone. There's no progesterone which is working on the uterus. There is no dip in the estrogen and progesterone because of the constant high levels of LH. So the endometrium keeps developing for those 3 or 4 months, and because the endometrium becomes very thick, whenever she starts menstruation, the menstruation can go on for a number of days. And it was a very funny thing she said pretty late in her history that sometimes she would have to take the medication to initiate the periods. Of course, these are the hormones. And if the bleeding continues for a long time, then she would take vitamin D supplements. Now, I was just wondering why vitamin D, and I saw that there are some people who have done studies on effect of vitamin D on PCOS. So maybe in her case, she said she was very sure, doctor. Sorry. See, if my period doesn't stop in 7 days, I take high doses of vitamin D and it stops. I said, fine, fine. That may be working for her. So her menstrual flow was constant, gush of bright red flow at that time, she said. More at night and more in lying down. So now you can think of, there are so many drugs which has menses more at night time. So one of the drug is mag group, magcarb, magphos, magmure. Then you can have uh, Bovista. These are the drugs. Creosote only when lying down. So these are so many drugs where menses only during lie down. There are drugs where there is menses only during daytime. And then in that case, you can think of pulsatilla or causticum. These are the drugs when only when she walks, pulsatilla gets a bleeding. So anyway, these are just a few finer things on which you can think of certain remedies. And the menstrual cycle, what happens exactly before, during, after, the quantity, the quality, the type of bleeding, the color of the bleeding, the clots, the pain, the absence of pain, and the presence of pain. All this is very, very important when you are dealing with a menstrual complaint or dealing with a female and female genital system. So, one more thing I have found, most of the patient with polycystic ovarian disease, most of them will not have so much of pain. And why is it so? Because the anovulatory cycles are usually the painless cycles. That's so sometimes when patient come with little discomfort during the menstrual cycle, that gives you some ideas. Maybe the tube light should go on that yes, maybe she has been ovulating now. So little discomfort during the menstrual cycle or just before the menstrual cycle is suggestive that this cycle could have been an ovulatory cycle. So that's a good sign in a way. So she also had a reflux symptom since 4 to 5 years, constant belching, burning in the stomach, typical symptoms, aggravation from acids, aggravation from spicy, aggravation from heavy food, and coffee. Now, mind well, I will go to her life situation. This patient was not eating well, she was not sleeping well, she had a lot of stress in her life. She had headaches since the age of 13 years, just at the time when the puberty has started, never well since puberty. So don't jump to pulsatilla. She is not a pulsatilla patient. But anyway, not well since puberty. Is pulsatilla not well since menopause? Is lachesis and graphitis not well since last attack of pneumonia? Is calica not well since malaria? I can think of metromure. Anyway, so her ailments from started from puberty. So these are the hormonal headaches. We see a lot of patients with hormonal headaches even in the US. Hormonal acne, hormonal headaches, ailments from stress. A lot of she was a I'll come to that later on. She was a managing director of a Montessori school, and she had to deal with staff. She had to deal with parents. She had to deal with children. So and monetary funds and all that. So a lot of stressful time that she's had. Ailments from sun. At that time, it was daily. At the age of 13 years, her headaches were daily. But now it is once a week. And again, hammering pain, which is typically hammering migrainous, aggravation from light, aggravation noise. But she said she was better in a fetal position. She would just completely curled up in a dark room and she would feel better. She would sleep only for a few hours since last 4 years. She had problem with sleep. She had a sort of a insomnia. Till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, she just wouldn't sleep. Her mind would be very active. She would be just planning for the next day's work. She just wouldn't sleep. Even if she would sleep, say by 9 o'clock, watching TV or watching on a iPad, she would wake up at 12 and then she would be wide awake till 4 o'clock in the morning. So she had a very, very irregular sleeping pattern. And one more thing, I don't know, I have mentioned this, but she had a very irregular dietary habits. Of course, she was all alone. She was working almost 12 to 18 hours a day. She was a workaholic. And she would just have one meal a day, just dinner. No breakfast, no lunch, just straight dinner. So she had a very, very irregular eating habits, sleeping habits, and that was the cause of her GERD. So she's a founder and CEO of a Montessori school and was living alone for the last 12 years. When we went to her mind symptoms, of course, she and her mother were all both together when we were taking the history. She herself said she had a lot of OCD symptoms. She didn't want to specify what was it, but she said she still has germophobia. She has a bird phobia. She had a bad experience with some birds in her childhood, and since then she is just afraid of birds. She just doesn't want to be near birds. She had one more funny thing is she just cannot travel because she needs to have her routine, her showering routine, her pillow has to be there wherever she goes, her bed sheet has to be there wherever she goes. So she just stops traveling. She has to have her showering routine. That was a very peculiar thing in this case. She also had aversion to allopathic medications. Oh my gosh, this is a very difficult case. As you go further in this case, you'll realize she was a case of hypertensive. She was advised antihypertensive medication, but she didn't want to take. She had such high irregular periods. She was advised oral contraceptive pills. She didn't want to take it. So the only remedy that I think of is given in the repertory by Ellen and Ellen's TF Ellen's Materia Medica is Aeschylus for aversion to allopathic medication. This is by the way, of course, you're not going to give Aeschylus just on this symptom. So just then the history, I started with Nux vomica, which was fitting her perfect life situation at that particular moment. Remember, you are not going to get a full history of a patient in the first visit. There are so many factors which are around that patient, around the time that she comes to you for the history. She's meeting you for the first time. Maybe she doesn't want to open up to you. Maybe she has a mother. She doesn't want to discuss certain things when the mother is around. And at the same time, you can't be pushy and say, no, let your mother be out. We will only talk to you. If she feels that she's confident of sharing her things with you in person, maybe she would have asked her mother to stay outside and she would have discussed it. But this patient was a difficult patient, very closed. And when you took the history, no anxiety, no sadness, anxiety situational, germophobia and all that was there, OCD was there. But otherwise, on day-to-day basis, she never had an anxiety issues. She was very loving. She said, oh, the patient can portray a different picture. They can, and it's very difficult to break through that boundary, that wall. And you can never know what patient is saying is absolutely truth or not. So why am I saying all that? Because her real history came pretty late. So I started with Nux vomica, and she was seen 4 weeks later. Her symptoms were better. Her stomach symptoms were better. Her headaches were better, but still sleep was still an issue. At the next follow-up, she was in tears because her mother and parents who were visiting her in the US had gone away. Now she feels lonely. She said, Doctor, I feel I should have a companion. We didn't dig too much because there are a lot of privacy issues. And if patient is not opening up on her own, there's no use probing her. I think when the right time comes, when the patient feels confident that yes, she has to share certain things, the time will come instead of us probing into it. So she had a lot of tears. She was feeling missing her parents, and she was all alone by herself. Her brother was studying in New York. So she was in tears because her parents left. So we again gave her Ignatia just to tide over her emotional state. Few months later, she came with a different complaints. This was 2 or 3 months after her first initial history. She came with dizziness, especially while looking down, turning the head, with blurring of vision. Headache had returned, which was better. So she was just on Nux vomica initially, followed by Ignatia. The menstrual cycles were still irregular. I'll come to that little later. Headache had come back with flashes of light, and the pain would wake her up from sleep. So much of severe migrainous headache she had. And her blood pressure on examination was 150 by 104. And Because of her blackouts, because of her flashes of light, she had to go to emergency because her migraines were too bad. She went to her doctor and he ordered an MRI. An MRI showed a multiple punctate lesions. They were not sure whether they are tumors or they were cysts. She was asked to meet a neurologist, and on basis of dizziness, looking down on eye movements, she being a single, that's what she's been always talking about, a companionship. So taking as a suppression of sexual desire or infrequent use of OC pills in the past, suppression of menses. And if you look up Conayam and some of the rubrics of Conayam, even that includes the ovarian induration also. But of course, the main emphasis was put on her brain tumor and her giddiness that was a presenting symptom. So she was on Conayam. The neurologist said that it was possibly a grade 2 brain tumor, and thankfully for her, it was probably a benign. And he advised to get a scan with contrast to get a clearer diagnosis. But that was also not helpful in confirming the diagnosis. In meantime, the headaches and dizziness persisted. Her menstrual symptoms became worse, and we continued with Conayam 200. This was a second follow-up after a month. Now, what is strange is this patient just lost to follow-up for a year, almost for a year, and she came back after a year. She returned with no headaches and no dizziness. Oh, we were happy. Okay, good. Maybe the Conayam worked. The brain scan had been repeated a few months ago and there was no evidence of tumor. She was perfectly fine. I was also wondering, a patient with diagnosis of brain tumor, and she was so calm and so cool, not worried about the brain tumor. But anyway, it was a benign tumor, and thankfully, with the repeated scan, it had gone. But she had a severe depression. So this is again, now see, the history is now unfolding. Then she gave me the real life situation, which she had not shared with us for the 4, 5, 6 visits that she had with us. She had a very, very traumatic childhood. Then she shared that her father abandoned her family when she was about 10-year old, and her father was very abusive towards her mother. And I've not mentioned everything in the history, but she said for 2 years that after her mother ran away from the abusive husband, almost for 2 years, they were sort of, this patient is of Indian origin. She was somewhere brought up in Calcutta. For 2 years, they had such a bad struggle in their life that sometimes they used to sleep on the platform because they had no one else to go to. Finally, her mother went back to her mother's place and started living with her mother's family. There also, she had a very traumatic years, almost for 5 or 6 years. Her mama, mother's brother was molesting her. So she had a very, very traumatic childhood. And the one after another episodes keep happening to this girl. Her mother remarried. That father was good, the stepfather was good. But she fell in love with someone whom she had met and married him. She came to US, but the marriage was never consummated. That guy left her immediately after marriage, and they were staying separately. All this history she never told us in the first day when she came to us. Husband asked for divorce almost after 12 years of being married on paper. They were just married on paper. And when she came to us, why was she depressed? Because the husband asked for a divorce. And husband was granted divorce on the ground of not staying together and not consummated marriage for such a long time. Now this female had a fear of abandonment. Her father abandoned her. Her uncle abused her. She gave one more history when she was doing internship and she was raped by one of her close male friend. She was so novice at that time. She was such a person who didn't understand what's happening. She was so immature. that she would trust people, and of being, and that feeling of being abandonment, or feeling of she wanted someone close to her, and so she would cling to people, but those people whom she was very close to took advantage of her. So that fear of staying alone, fear of being abandoned was so much marked in this patient that it caused her so much of grief, and she tried to share it with her friends, but some of the friends would share, would be okay with her, some of them would started keeping a distance from her. So on this history, initially I started with Natramur, so much of grief, so much of depression, so much of disappointment, and she was in tears. Her headaches and gastric symptoms which has resurfaced, improved after Natramur. So some part of her was responding well to Natramur. Menses, she started getting again menses. She got a one period which was little profuse and painful. But now she says her flow is dark brown with clots. And again, she said, Doctor, my flow is always when it is more at night. Whenever I lie down, the flow is heavy. She looked towards her friends for support after the annulment. Some of them supported, some of them didn't. Now she feels more abundant. And she says, my family wants me to support my brother who is in New York, who is studying there. They want me to support him financially, emotionally. And she said, it is too much for me. So now one day I'm going to tell my parent that I just cannot look after all the responsibilities. After this history, after the full history was revealed to me, then since last 2 or 3 months, she is on MAC-carb. And after giving MAC-carb, she has responded pretty well. Of course, her giddiness and migraine is very much under attack, very much under control. Her acidity symptoms are much better. Sleep is still an issue, but she still manages 6 to 7 hours of sleep. She started exercising. She has started taking good care of herself. So her emotional state is also better. The menstrual cycles, at least since last 3 months, are coming on time. So this is a very recent case. Just had a follow up yesterday, and I thought I can share it with you. And as I mentioned to you earlier, sometimes her period used to last for a long time. So as a acute, I have been giving her Thalaspi bursa pastoris only during the time of menstruation. So the moment the period start, she starts with Thalaspi bursa pastoris, 3 pills 4 times a day, and last 3 cycles she said that the periods are stopping in 1 week's time, and that is thanks to the Thalaspi bursa pastoris. So instead of taking vitamin D that she used to take, now just with Thalaspi bursa pastoris, the cycles are being controlled, and it is controlled because the cycles are also coming on time. So there is not so much of thickening of the endometrium. So there's not so much of built up of endometrium, and because the built up of endometrium is also not there, the bleeding also is naturally not going to be very, very profuse. But just to give her a psychological support, at the same time, Thalaspi bursa is a good drug for dark red bleeding with clots. And that's why MAC-carb as a constitutional remedy, and Thalaspi bursa as SOS for menorrhagia works in this case. Maybe in future, she will require carcinosin. So that's the next drug that I'm going to think of as an intercurrent, because of the severe suppression of feelings, abandoned feeling, being abused, that all is going to be pointing towards carcinosin later in life. And of course, OCD, that's also a very, very important symptom of carcinosin. So we still have 15 more minutes. Pratik, should we continue?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have 3, 4 more cases, maybe depending on the time. We can just go through little faster. So this is another case which was also very dear to me, and here I have used the intercurrent. So I just wanted to show you different ways of prescribing. This patient, this was unmarried, but she was engaged at that time. She came to me in 2005 in India with oligomenorrhea since puberty. Her menstrual cycles were very, very irregular, coming every 3 to 4 months, moderate, irregular, and occasionally painful. She would get cramps in the legs, she would get giddiness, and she would have a little bit of dysmenorrhea. She also had a white discharge. She was putting on weight, which is also very typical of PCOS. Another important thing in this case were the associated complaints. The one was the urticaria, which was coming up on pressure. Whenever any heart pressure, like a wristband or a watch she would wear, that would give her urticaria. Artificial jewelry would give her urticaria. She would be allergic to plastic. So some element of allergies were there. And she also had headaches. Chronic headache was another chief complaint. So along with PCOS and irregular period, another chief complaint was headache. These chronic headaches were on alternate days. Exposure to sun, computer, eye strain, lack of sleep, mainly in the left temple and supraorbital region, or it would start in the cervical region. Bursting sensation, aggravation afternoon from using eyes, better by sleep and better by pressure, and she would get a severe nausea with eye strain. So eye strain giving rise to headache, too much of computer work, and sun. Generals, nothing very characteristic. Thirst was increased. She would crave for sweets as well as salt. She was craving for mangoes, craving for spices, craving for gulab jamun. Hard stools, profuse sweat. Odor was plus, very offensive smell of perspiration. She had a lot of responsibility in her family. She was the eldest. Her father was working with a lawyer as a clerk. She had younger two sisters, and I remember one of the sister was our assistant, and she was our student. And the brother was studying in the US. He was doing, I think, aeronautical engineering, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of financial pressures were there. And she being a lawyer, she had a lot of responsibility in the house. She would be very irritable. She would sulk. If she would get angry, she wouldn't talk for a number of days. Sensitive to reprimand. She was very sensitive. She didn't want anybody to point fingers at her. And she would ignore people if, sorry, let's go back. Ignores people who are offending her. So this was her mindset. Past history of malaria 15 years ago. Not very significant, but otherwise family history of mother having hypertension, diabetes, and mother had alopecia areata. So somewhat syphilitic history was there. Youngest sister had hydrocephalus and father had diabetes mellitus. So this case, way back in 2005, she came to me. She came with ultrasound. It was, I think it was done, I think 2002, I'm not sure. But it showed a polycystic ovarian disease on the sonography. The rest of the investigations were normal. So I started, it was a clear-cut case of Natromure. I started with Natromure 200 and started with infrequent 2-weekly Natromure I used to give her. So this patient, I thought Natromure was a very indicated remedy. I don't know why, but she was not responding to this remedy. She was on Natromure repeatedly at the interval of 2 to 3 weeks with no change in the menstrual pattern almost for 5 months. Now remember, this is a very taxing time for patient and doctor. Not getting period for 5 months, but just because she was my assistant's sister, she was my student's sister, she held on with me. And I said, no, Natromure seems to be the remedy. Why it is not working on her? So after going through her history again, I realized that maybe there's something missing. Some stimulus is missing in this case. She came with 4 months of amenorrhea, almost 5 or 4 months of amenorrhea, with only loss of only 1 kg of weight. I had told her, you have to start exercising, you have to have a good control over your diet. The other symptoms were better. The headaches were better, the urticarial symptoms were better, but her menstruation was still an issue. So just as an intercurrent, I gave her 1 dose of sulfur because of her offensiveness of discharges, offensive perspiration, hot patient, craving for sugar. And after sulfur 1A, these are the initial cases that I have dealt with in PCOD. I realized that one single remedy, even if you think it's a most indicated remedy just doesn't work in PCOS. She requires an additional stimulus, additional something to stir up the organism. So after sulfur, you'll find that just one dose of sulfur and the SL was given. After that, her cycles became regular of 35 days. Even if it becomes 35 days and regular, I'm happy in PCOS patients. So September, October, November, December, January, February, almost 35 day cycle. 1, 9, 6, 10, 10, 11, 10, 12, 25, 1, and 28, 2. Almost regular for next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cycles. This was an old sonography. No, sorry, the new sonography again showed both ovaries shows features of PCOD. So it's not that sonography is picture of PCOD is not going to go away even if your patient starts responding. Remember, that is going to be a very tough thing for you to explain to your patient. The sonographic picture may not go away. If it goes away, maybe it was a milder case and it's better. But you need to have a long-term follow-up of these patients to say that yes, definitely the patient is responding very well to the homeopathic treatment. FSH and LH were also almost normal. See the ratio, 5.1 to 3.3. Her periods were regular, mind well. So it was given infrequently. Sulfur as an intercurrent I had to give. I had just give, I think, in April, 2 doses were given, and in October 2006. This is now the next year. And she got married somewhere in May. And she conceived in October. And she came again with an ultrasound report of a single viable intrauterine gestation of 6 weeks. So these patients give you a lot of confidence. It gives you a lot of feeling of happiness that instead of going through IVF, instead of going through IUI, instead of going through those hormonal injections, if patient can conceive naturally with homeopathy, that gives you a lot of satisfaction. So what is the role of sulfur? Why did I thought of sulfur? So this is a beautiful writing in Roberts again. There is hardly any organ or function that is not influenced by sulfur. So whenever you're stuck, especially in an antisoric case, or you feel there's a sulfur element in a patient, give few doses and your patient will start responding well. Even Herring has seen that its influence in such glandular conditions as the one which is recognized. And one function of sulfur is that it stirs the organism to react. Now I remember one of my colleague telling me, so what is a similimum? So there are different approach. If you have to enter the house, either you go through the front door, you can enter the house. You go through the roof, you still enter the house. Or you go through the windows. Finally, you have to enter the house. So you have X approach, you have a Y approach, you have a Z approach, or you look the devious way. Finally, you have to enter the house. Finally, you have to find the similimum. So whichever method you use, if you have targeted, you have got into the house, that's the major work done. And then once your similimum is very, very clear, you are very sure of similimum, look for the drugs which are related to your similimum. Calcarea, lyco, sulfur, or carcinosin comes also in a circular fashion. Pulsatilla, fluoric acid also goes in a circular fashion, or sometimes pulsatilla and lycopodium, pulsatilla and silicea. Pulsatilla could be acute, silicea could be chronic. And look for the miasmatic background in the past or in the presenting picture. Sometimes patient comes with a PCOD patient comes up with a wart, and then the remedy becomes very clear. Oh, this patient now requires a thuja. So you give a dose of thuja and your constitution starts working very well. So sulfur acted in this fashion in this patient. Maybe one more case, one or two more cases, and we will call it a day. This is again a very interesting case. I have used a nosode. So let's go through this history, and I've just put those very salient features in this patient. This patient, I had used Nozod and I had used Sarcode in her husband. This patient, of course, was related to me. Now she came to me in June 2000, and now her son, who she came with infertility, she came with secondary infertility. Now son is going to become a doctor. He's going to get admission into medical college. So anyway, she visited the clinic in 2000 June. She came with polycystic ovarian disease. She came with history of two missed abortions. As I told you, that it is one of the complication of PCOD, that patient can conceive, but they have more chances of repeated abortions because of PCOD. So she had two missed abortion in July 1196 and March 1999. And of course, she got a DNC done after both the abortions. Unfortunately, I would have wished if you have done the studies of that fetus to see whether there were any fetal anomalies, but she was not done. It was not done. She was extremely anxious to conceive. I remember this patient very well. She's a close relative. A sense of hopelessness has set in. This patient's infertility patients have a lot of psychological baggage, hopelessness, feeling of worthlessness, or they start blaming themselves. Why? And this doesn't lead them anywhere, but they go into that negative depression mode. Very sad and depressed, and she developed even aversion to coition because of that. What's the point? That sort of a feeling she had developed. She did not like her husband also playing with the children. She would feel with jealousy when she saw some other mothers. That's very, very common in patients who are trying to conceive. Dark complexioned, grossly obeys, hirsute features, constipated. Now, this is a very typical now. I have put down the pointers. Aversion to sweets. Her menses were late, dark, clotted. Hormonal assays at that time were definitely abnormal. The FSH and LH ratio was reversed. She had high levels of free testosterone. Sonography had shown polycystic ovarian disease. Husband was also thoroughly investigated, and he also had oligospermia and hyperthyroidism. So I put husband on thyroidinum 30, and this patient I had put her on syphilinum 1M, which works very well in cases of habitual abortions or history of missed abortions. This is a syphilitic miasm which doesn't allow fetus to grow beyond a time. And graphitis was given as a constitutional remedy. And she conceived in October 2000. Very, very fulfilling, very feel nice, feel happy. And she was put on complete bed rest, and she carried pregnancy to term. And now, as I just mentioned, her son is about to go into the medical school. So syphilinum, because of the missed abortion, and she was a typical graphitis patient, fat, aversion for sweets, and all that really helped in selecting the remedy. And thyroidinum is again a very dear remedy to me. So as I was talking about my journey with PCOS, we were back in 1990s. There was only thyroidinum as a very important sarcode which was used for, of course, for thyroid dysfunction as well as patients with irregular menstrual cycle. And that time, there were a lot of theories and a lot of experimentation with thyroidinum. So lower potency was used for irregular periods, amenorrhea, and higher potencies. I used to use at that time even for menstrual menorrhagia or metrorrhagia, wherever there is a thyroid dysfunction. And usually in a patient of endocrinal problem, they do have either high levels of prolactin or high levels of thyroid dysfunction. So usually all the hormonal issues can go hand in hand together. I have seen some patients recently of high levels of uh, anti-Mullerian hormone, and this anti-Mullerian hormone is also very uh, high in patients of PCOD. So patients with PCOD will have high anti-Mullerian hormone, while patient who is going for premature ovarian failure or who are going towards menopause will have a low levels of anti-Mullerian hormone. Surprisingly, the gynecologist and infertility specialist, they give a lot of importance to levels of AMH. So I have had many patients who felt so frustrated because their AMH levels are very low and the gynecologist or the infertility specialist were not ready to take them up for IVF treatment. And they were really depressed. I remember in last 7 years, I've seen 3 cases of low AMH, and they have responded very well to homeopathy constitutional treatment. So, sorry. So don't get disheartened by low AMH levels. It's just one criteria for gynecologist. But with homeopathy, I don't think so. That's an absolute no. You can definitely try homeopathy, and patients do respond well with low AMH levels. Anyway, this was something about the thyroidism that would be I still give to patients with low sperm count oligospermia, especially when there is a arrested development is a key for this remedy. Pratik, should we call it off because I have one more case, otherwise
You can share
we
the
can
case. People are eagerly waiting. You can share the case.
continue.
Yes.
I'll go a little faster because this is a different approach,
Okay.
and then I think maybe in another 10 minutes, and then we'll call it a day then.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is another, see, as I mentioned to you, I was amongst so many cases, I had to choose which one to choose the patients for this seminar today. So as you must have realized, one is was a constitutional treatment, one is with the nosewort, and now this is a patient with sarcode. And this is the case in nutshell I had mentioned even in my first lecture. So this patient was seen by me in India in 2007. Actually, she and her husband they migrated from Singapore because she had a difficulty in conceiving, and they were trying for infertility. They were going to try for infertility treatment in India. So when she came to me, her chief complaint was that she had a irregular spotting, few days before periods and even few days after the periods are over. So almost for 10 days she would have spotting or a bleeding. So 3 to 4 days before period, 3 to 4 days after menses, she had a spotting. And the doctors had possibly diagnosed her with a corpus luteal deficiency. So this is what happens when you have a lack of progesterone, so or irregular levels of progesterone. And that brings about spotting because the hormonal levels are fluctuating in the premenstrual period. So you have irregular spotting. So when she came to me, her LMP was 15th of June, and her spotting had already started when she came to me. So it's very irregular period, coming early, coming late. And she gave a history of one conception in 2002. And this was conceived with clomiphene citrate. That's a fertile, that's a remedy which is given for multiple ovulation when we are suspecting a patient with an ovulation. But that pregnancy was it went into a natural abortion and she had to get a DNC done. So she came with secondary infertility. She had hirsute features. Appetite was good. Every 4 hours she would eat. Thirst was decreased. She desires chocolate, which was very, very important. 5 marks after lunch. She must have a chocolate. She must have some sweets. Coffee, chicken, cocoa, and she also had a craving for ash and clay. Now this could be a PQRS symptom, or this could be a common symptom when patient has iron deficiency anemia. And this patient had iron deficiency anemia. Stools, she said she had complaint of bleeding per rectum. It could be either piles or fissure, we were not sure. She had addiction to coffee, otherwise she would have headache. She was thermally hot. She always wanted AC. She's come from Singapore, again hot and humid weather. She was used to remaining in AC. So now let's going back to her menstrual history. Flow was either scanty or moderate or profuse. It was a very irregular flow, and flow would be profuse when she was put on progesterone. As you remember, I just mentioned to you that she had a query corpus luteal deficiency. So in the later part of the menstrual cycle, from 15th day, that is from the time of ovulation to menstruation, usually these patients are given progesterone just to support in case she is pregnant. So if she was given that progesterone in Singapore before she came to me, her cycles would be profuse. Bright red or brownish spotting, dark brownish with corpus luteal deficiency. So very changeable flow, changeable pattern of a bleeding. Before menses, she would have little vestalgia, pain in the nipples. And as I mentioned, she had a missed abortion, and that pregnancy she conceived with clomiphene citrate. Her mind symptoms were very important. They were pointer to the constitutional remedy that I started with. Very changeable in her moods. You can never be sure of her moods. All of a sudden she would be irritable. All of a sudden she could be depressed. She could be having a, I'm not sure because you cannot diagnose just on the symptom, but could be a bipolar depression. Depression during menses, cries a lot, speaks very fast, palpitations, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of mood swings, sensitive to criticism. She wouldn't like anybody pointing fingers at her. Sensitive nature, she would brood. She was working in office, stressful office work. She just cannot control her emotions. Along with that, the neglected feeling, the forsaken feeling. At the same time, she said she was very pampered in the childhood, and that's why she expects too much of attention with her husband, from her in-laws. Fear of dogs, anxious, depressed, cries when alone, and she would be just sobbing. So much of emotional turmoil was there in this patient. She would be better by consolation. She would be better if she talks to her husband. She had her overreaction to any events. It was never a appropriate reaction. It was always either too high or she would go in a too low stage, and that's why I thought maybe she had query a bipolar depression. Easily moved by emotions, changeability, can be easily be convinced what to do next. She had decreased confidence, very talkative. She expresses her feelings to her husband. So I started as a constitutional, the safest drug for menstrual irregularities, changeable moods, changeable menstruation, changeable menstrual pattern, and its emotional turmoil. Pulsatilla was the drug that I had chosen, and I started with 7 days of Pulsatilla. She came with normal flow, but she still had a spotting post-menstrual. And when she came to me, she already had started spotting. Emotionally, she was doing better. Earlier, she had outbursts 2 to 3 times in a week. Now, in twice in last 20 days, sleep was better. Next cycle, again, she had a spotting. So I was not happy with the response of Pulsatilla. I thought maybe her lack of progesterone or anovulation also should have been taken care of by Pulsatilla. So she had spotting for 5 days and then candy, and then she had a normal menses. And spotting was pale colored. She also had a bleeding PR. And as I mentioned to you, see, her hemoglobin was very low, 9.5. That explains why she had that pica. Of course, you can think of other drugs for pica like Calcarea and Cicuta and many other drugs, Viretrum. I also got her prolactin levels done because of her emotional turmoil. So if the prolactin levels are high and you want to look it up in the repertories, most of the patient with high prolactin will have galactoria. So you look up the rubric, galactoria in non-pregnant females. That is a very important rubric when you're dealing with a patient with high levels of prolactin. Anyway, it was normal in her case. More than 20 is something to worry about. So I still continued with Pulsatilla. And then I said, something is not right. She had hard stools, she had traveler's constipation. And then I thought I should try with folliculinum. And in this patient, I tried folliculinum 30. Usually the sarcodes are given in low potency. So in this patient, I started with 30, and my protocol in this patient was to start folliculinum from 5th day of the menses, or 2nd day you can start. It's like giving Clomid. Start on the 2nd day of the menstrual cycle till she ovulates. So folliculum 30 was given from
for 10 days, from 5th day of the menses to 15th day of the menstrual cycle. And Pulsatilla 1 I gave as a infrequent constitutional remedy. And I continued for 3 months, and she came with a urine pregnancy test positive. And subsequently, the patient delivered twins. So this was a very interesting. It was possibly the first case that I tried folliculum as a specific to bring about ovulation in this patient. And this patient gave me a lot of confidence on trying it out, folliculum. So I think last lecture also I did mention a little bit about folliculum. So folliculum is a wonderful drug, especially when a patient has a lot of emotional and physical symptoms from ovulation to menstruation. So there are so many of my patients, they are so sensitive that even the time of ovulation, they pick up so many symptoms like pain or bleeding or a cramp or mood swings or leukorrhea. And these are very extremely sensitive patients. They are sensitive to touch, they are sensitive to noise. In general, they are very sensitive. Folliculum patients are very, very sensitive. So when carcinosin most indicated, even carcinosin doesn't bring about the results you can think of folliculum. So I've used folliculum for severe PMS, patient having extreme mood swings, extreme PMS, extreme reactions in the premenstrual period. It's like a dimorphic disease, like it's a premenstrual dimorphic disease. It's a special medical term given for that. Or a patient who is approaching menopause and she has a lot of emotional symptoms because of lack of male hormones. I've used folliculum. So coming to the last slide now. Again, I'm quoting Roberts. Our remedies will not upset the balance of endocrine secretion. It's not like giving Altroxin. Patient can have from a hypothyroidism can go into hyperthyroidism, and again you have to titrate the dose of Altroxin. So these homeopathic remedies are pretty safe. They will not bring about the drastic changes in the hormones. It will fill in the demands of the system in all the parts without stimulating much of these organs, which maintain a relatively stable balance. So coming to the end, this is my approach in some of the cases that I have seen very, very good results with PCOS. Remember, it's a lifelong condition. It's like a lifelong dealing with the diabetes. So with exercises, with maintaining the weight, with taking into consideration of reduction of stress, because stress is going to be a part and parcel of life. And as some time back, I had got a WhatsApp forward that Chetan Bhagat had mentioned that Indian women are so stressed because they have to constantly prove to the world that they are doing better because of the constant comparison with other people. We have Indian females are in general most stressed even compared to the American women. And remember, as females, we have an extra X that makes our our gender more stronger. I'm sure you will be aware of it. If it's a neonate, maybe it's a premature neonate or a baby with a problem, but if it's a female child, she has a better chance of survival than a male child. So the females are a superior in that sense that we have an extra X. We can deal with more stresses in life. We can deal with the labor pains. We imagine the type of pain, and most of the females go through it. It's just excruciating pain. But remember, we are the sort of a superior sex formed by or created by God or a higher authority or whatever you call it. So this is my experience. I've shared my experiences with you, and it's an ongoing thing. Something in future is going to maybe throw more light on PCOS and dealing with it or treating it or maybe curing it in the future. But right now, we are still struggling. The world is struggling. I'm not just talking about homeopath, but even allopathic line of treatment. They don't have much to offer. If menstrual irregularities are there, they put them on OC pills. If insulin resistance is very, very characteristic, then they put them on metformin. If the hirsute features are very characteristic and upsetting to the patient, they put on anti-androgens, spironolactone. So So we are still treating the allopathic wise, they are still treating the symptoms, but nobody can go to the pathology because we don't know the cause of PCOS. So I hope I have been able to share my experiences. Maybe after 10 or 20 years, you will be sharing some of your wonderful cases. And I just want to wish you all the best for your future dealing with the patients, and wish you a good night. So Pratik, we'll call